our playoff bracket is finally set. So I want to talk about a couple things here. First is going to be the actual field and the committee deciding to drop Notre Dame out all of a sudden on the final week of the season and put Miami in and also keep Alabama in the playoff field. And then a couple other things higher up in the rankings that I don't think have been talked about too much over the past couple of days. I think have been overshadowed by the bubble talk. And I want to go into the matchups briefly and talk about that and also touch on how I think the I guess the playoff might be changing in the future because of this season. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is Notre Dame being excluded from the playoff and doing a little bit of whining, declining their bowl bid. I think the committee got it right. I think there's really no reason for the committee to ignore head to head between Miami and Notre Dame. And I think, and this is something I talked about a few days ago, was I think the committee always does this, and they did it again, and they chose the path of least resistance, right? It's the controversy that the committee was potentially going to deal with on Selection Sunday was dropping Alabama for losing a playoff or sorry losing a conference championship game and the backlash they'd get from the SEC and from uh, college football fans as a whole if that happens. A second thing is it potentially ignoring head to head in Miami and Notre Dame. And then I think the other thing was, and this was kind of a recent development with Duke beating Virginia, was what happens if you have a 12-team playoff and you put two G5s in and you leave the ACC out entirely? And so I think there was a little bit of pressure with Duke beating Virginia and Virginia missing out on the playoffs entirely to sub in an ACC team in there. And I think that might have given Miami a bit of an edge over Notre Dame. I also wonder, looking at the bracket here, if there was any idea or any thought about excluding Notre Dame to avoid that Notre Dame A&M rematch in the first round. I don't think that really would have played into the committee's decision, but something to think about. So I think the committee got it right. I think they took the path of least resistance, and the teams in the field um, are probably the best. But it does make you wonder, hey, why, Notre Dame and Miami were both off this season or off this week. Why'd they choose to jump Miami in the final week? Because they've been saying the past month or so that they're not looking at head to head because Miami and Notre Dame are not in the same conversation. And that's how it's starting out, right? They said we evaluate teams in groups of three or four, and Miami and Notre Dame haven't been in the same conversation. Um, I don't know if they explicitly said three or four, but that's kind of been the number that's been floating around for years now, right? And then all of a sudden, Miami and Notre Dame are moving within three or four, and they're still saying, "Oh, we haven't compared them to one another. We haven't looked at head to head." And you get into a situation where they're only separated by BYU in the final week, and they jump Alabama up ahead of Notre Dame. And I thought, and I mentioned this last week, is I think they jumped Alabama up. So in the event they lose to Georgia, you can drop them down below Notre Dame, so you can justify Notre Dame and Miami not being next to each other. So you can justify ignoring head to head. And turns out that's not what they did. And I think the only rational conclusion then is either one, the committee decided after weeks, of maybe hoping that Notre Dame or Miami would stumble to just take the path of least resistance. Um, and they were sort of just procrastinating this decision. They messed up, dropping Miami too far. They messed up ignoring head to head initially, and they were hoping it would work itself out, and it didn't. And so they decided to bite the bullet this week. Or I think, and this is something that people have been speculating on for the past few weeks, is these ranking shows every week are really just entertainment, right? And they're just doing, they're throwing out one piece of rage bait and one piece for the media environment to talk about for the week, something controversial. And for the past few weeks, Miami being behind Notre Dame is something they could always rely on, right? Um, so I think that's it, and I think it's really ridiculous if that is what's going on, that we have these weekly rankings because they're not telling us anything important um, if we're just going to ignore them in the final rankings, right? Um, so that's my thought on that. I think at the end of the day, the committee did get it right. I don't think Notre Dame belongs in the playoff um, in this field. I should preface because I think a lot of people are comparing Notre Dame this year to Notre Dame last year or SMU last year, and I think we're making a lot of comparisons across years that we shouldn't be because the 2024 playoffs are completely different from the 2025 playoffs, right? So that's my thought. The other thing I thought about that people haven't been talking about in these rankings, and this is something that's been going on for the past few weeks, is I really have no clue why Oregon's at number five. Um, they've strung together a few really impressive wins the last few weeks. They went into Kinnick, they won against Iowa, they beat USC, and obviously they beat Washington at Husky Stadium during rivalry week. So I think that was a really impressive stretch. But their best win is probably that USC win. Um, Honestly, that Penn State win from week four or whatever it was is still one of their most impressive wins. And if I'm comparing Oregon's resume to Ole Miss's resume, where Ole Miss has that one loss to, they also have a quote unquote good loss to Georgia, and their loss was on the road compared to Oregon's at home. Um, and they have that win over Oklahoma. They have a win over a playoff team in Oklahoma, not just playoff team, but team hosting a first round game. I think that's far better than anything on Oregon's resume. And A&M obviously has to win over Notre Dame. And I know Notre Dame, I don't think Notre Dame should be in the playoffs, but if we're just looking at what the product on the field is, Notre Dame is absolutely a top 10 team in the country, right? I mean, that's undeniable. I don't think they have a playoff resume, but they absolutely have a playoff roster and a playoff quality product on the field. Um, so I think A&M's win over Notre Dame is more impressive than anything Oregon's done. I think Oregon should absolutely be locked into the seven seed. And between Ole Miss and A&M, honestly, I don't really care who gets the five and who gets the six. Honestly, I think Ole Miss being the five to avoid that rematch with Tulane is probably what I would have done. Not that the committee should really be factoring in rematches when they're making these rankings, but I do think it's been weird that Oregon's been ranked number five for the past couple of weeks, and there hasn't really been any pushback to that. Because if I'm putting their resumes next to each other, they're really not comparable, right? Ole Miss and A&M are comparable. Um, their losses and their best wins are comparable. The quality of product on the field is comparable. Oregon, maybe eye test you think they're better, but I really don't think the resume is close at all. Um, So that's my thought on that. And I think Oregon's got a very favorable draw. They get to play James Madison in Eugene on a Saturday night. And that's the second thing I want to talk about here. Or I guess the third thing is I don't know what's going on with these game timings. Um, we've been messing it up in college football for what, a decade plus now, decades, with the national championship being played on a Monday night. Um, and in the first round here, we get playoff games on a Friday and a Saturday. We get a Friday night game and a triple header on Saturday. I think that's great. And somehow we're still kind of messing it up because why is Miami versus A&M at noon at 11 a.m. local in Kyle Field? I don't know why we have an 11 a.m. kick in Kyle Field. That should be a night game. Oklahoma, Alabama, make that a night game. Make that the 3:30 game on Saturday. Both are fine. But there's really no reason for Tulane Ole Miss and to be the late afternoon kick on Saturday and JMU Oregon to be the night game on Saturday. I know they're going to put a great show up at Autzen, and I'm sure that's going to be an exciting game and a great environment. But you can't tell me that we wouldn't rather have Alabama, Oklahoma in that slot or Miami A&M in that slot. And I wonder how much of this is, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes with the networks, but TNT gets the two G5 games. And I wonder if they had negotiated for the prime time and the late afternoon spots, and kind of had a guarantee on those two spots. And ESPN said, sure, y'all can have those spots. We're going to give you the two bad games. Um, I have no clue if that's the case. That's just speculation, but whatever it is, it's not good for the sport, and we need to fix that. We need to fix that fast, and we also need to get rid of that Monday night national championship. It's ridiculous that we're playing on Monday night, um, and we're letting the NFL play games on Saturday instead of us. So I think that's crazy. The other thing I want to talk about here, and I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about seeding, is I really have no clue why Georgia's at number three. Um, Look, Ohio State's been great all season, and they lost what by 3 points in the end. I don't think that was a bad loss by any means. I don't think it really changes my opinion of Ohio State greatly. But if I'm comparing Georgia's resume to Ohio State's resume, I'm looking at their best wins. They have a blowout win over Texas. They have a blowout win against Alabama. They have the win over Ole Miss. Two of those games are at home, one's a neutral site. But all three of those wins are better than anything on Ohio State's resume. Ohio State's best win, I would argue, is probably that win in week one over Texas, 14-7 in Columbus. Maybe they looked really impressive in the Washington game. They looked really impressive a couple weeks ago against Michigan, maybe Illinois or Penn State. I mean, they look dominant. But if I'm looking at their best win, it's probably Texas, and it's by 7. And we look at that's a common opponent between Ohio State and Georgia's got a much better win. And Georgia's got two wins better than that against Oklahoma, or sorry, Ole Miss and Alabama. They got the conference championship. There's really no metric other than the fact that Ohio State's been ahead of Georgia all season that would warrant Georgia being ranked at 3 behind Ohio State. That being said, if I'm a Georgia fan, I feel pretty good about this because I'm looking at the draw, and Ohio State's going to get either A&M or Miami, and Georgia is going to get an Ole Miss team they already played without their coach, or a Tulane team that I wouldn't expect much out of. So I think Georgia got a favorable draw here, uh, but I do think it's kind of crazy that Georgia's ranked at number 3. So something to think about. And then I guess the final thing here would be with these first round buys, these games are going to be scheduled. These are New Year's Six games. So Ohio State's going to be playing December 31st in the quarterfinals. Georgia, Indiana, Texas Tech all playing January 1st, New Year's Day. That's 25, 26 days between conference championships and quarterfinals. And we saw last year every single team that got a first round bye lost, right? I know Boise State was in there, so that was a little weird, but Georgia lost, and who else lost? Penn State lost, or not Penn State won, sorry. Georgia lost. I don't remember who else lost, but Oregon lost to Ohio State, and it would have been, I don't even remember who the last champ was, but someone else lost. And I guess it was Boise State that I already mentioned. Yeah, so all four teams lost this year. Georgia's the only team to get a first round bye this year that had a first round bye last year. So it'll be interesting to see how Kirby Smart preps his team for that almost 4 week gap in between games and how they approach their preparation for the Sugar Bowl. It's the same game that they played last year. So it'll be interesting to see that. It'll be interesting to see how Ohio State, not having a first round bye, responds to this. And then also Indiana and Texas Tech. Not only did they not have a first round bye last year, they have much less playoff experience than Georgia and Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle this and how all four of those teams learn from last year. Hopefully, we get much more competitive games in the quarterfinals this year. Uh, yeah, and I guess the final thing I did mention at the beginning of the video is how the playoffs will change. Um, you're looking at those spreads for the first round game. Oregon's a 21-point favorite at home against James Madison. Ole Miss is only 17.5-point favorite, and they beat Tulane by 35 earlier this season, right? It was a 45-10 blowout. I don't think it's good for the sport that we have these these blowout games in the quarterfinal or in the playoffs. And I also don't think it's good that we have all these rematches. Alabama, Oklahoma is a rematch. We saw that game a few weeks ago. Tulane, Ole Miss is a rematch. Ole Miss will probably advance to play Georgia. That's going to be a rematch in the quarterfinals. We could get more rematches in the semis and national championship. We got 3 rematches in conference championship weekend with Alabama, Georgia, and Texas Tech, BYU, and Duke, Virginia. So I don't think these rematches are good for the sport. I don't think it's fair that, take for example, if Alabama and Georgia rematch in the championship game, or maybe not that one, but if Texas Tech were to say play BYU and BYU gets the best of Texas Tech in the third match, and they go 1-2 and they win the one that really counts, I don't think these rematches are very fair. And I don't think it's good for the sport. I don't think that's something we want to see. So I wonder how one that gets handled in the future, and also playoff expansion, of course, and these automatic bids. I think the Big Ten and the SEC are going to push for removing these automatic bids, and I think there's going to be a lot of push for separating the G5 and the P4 into separate subdivisions. I don't think that's going to have a whole lot of traction, at least in the near future, but I think it is something to be looking out for, and I think it's something to be concerned about because we've removed regionalism from the sport. We've removed sort of this commitment to your team where you go out of high school and you sit and you work your way into a team's roster. And with the transfer portal, I think the transfer portal is great for the sport, but it's definitely changing the sport greatly. And I think it's removing a lot of the fabric of this of college football, the identity of the sport. And I think if we continue to strip away, separating the P4, separating the who has money with the from the who doesn't have money, um, I think that's going to continue to destroy the sport and make it more like the NFL. And that's not something I think any fan wants. So that's something to watch out for. I think we will see a lot of traction and with the automatic bid model that the Big Ten, Tony Petitti proposed, and a lot of people have sort of co-opted, which was that, hey, every conference is going to get automatic bids. The SEC and the Big Ten are going to get four each, and we're going to have these playing games on conference championship weekend. I can make another video about that. I think that has a lot of traction, and we might see a push for that and a 16 team playoff in the next couple years. I actually think what might be hindering that model is actually the SEC. And I think the SEC, if I'm the SEC, if I'm Greg Sankey, and I'm looking at this model where we get four automatic bids to the college football playoff, I'm thinking, man, we already got five this year. We got five in a 12-team playoff, and we got Texas and Vandy right on the outside looking in. So we were looking at seven plus. We were looking at seven teams in the playoffs without LSU and without South Carolina, who was supposed to be good. And, without all these great teams, why should we agree to only have four automatic bids and give the Big 12 two spots and the Big 10, who I think were probably better than four spots, right? So I think there's going to be pushback from the SEC, especially as they move to this nine-game conference model. We saw Kirby Smart talk about this after the SEC championship. Those teams are beat up, man. Georgia and Bama, they played their ninth SEC game in the SEC championship, and they're beat up. And now we're going to be moving forward in the SEC with you're going to be playing your P4 out of conference opponent. You're going to play nine conference games. And then you're telling me your top six teams are going to play a 10th SEC game. And then they're going to go to a 16-team playoff, play four more playoff games. I don't think Greg Sankey would be in favor of that. So I think that's actually potentially going to be a major roadblock for that model in the future. But I'll talk about it in a separate video. Let me know what y'all think. And yeah, until next time.